Graveyards are normally out of bounds to archaeologists, but here they were allowed to excavate the cemetery. And they uncovered the largest burial ground of medieval village children ever found in England. Their remains reveal the harsh realities of medieval life in extraordinary detail. At the English Heritage Laboratory in Portsmouth, Dr. Simon Mays has spent 20 years analysing their bones.
When we looked at the child skeletons, one of the first things that struck us was how small they were compared with modern children. So I've laid out here the skeleton of a 10-year-old from Warren Percy, and the one we've got to compare it with is thus the same size as a modern 10-year-old is. So you can see the size difference between the two.
Yeah, wow, that's extraordinary. So, in theory, a child of 10 ought to be that big.
That's right.
And so what accounts for the difference between the two?
I think primarily it's nutrition. It's the quality of their diet. These people were not eating a very nutritious diet.
So diet helps explain the difference between these two bones. This being the 10-year-old from Warren Percy, this being what they should have been at about that age.
That's right, and that translates to about a 9-inch difference in terms of standing height. So at that age, that's quite considerable.
Was this child unfortunate to die so young? Was that common at Warren Percy?
Well, quite a lot of them did die during childhood. About half of the skeletons we have from the churchyard are of people who died before they were in their late teens.
Right. Half?
Half, that's right.
Oh my God, right, that's terrifying mortality rates. 50-50 chance of actually making it to adulthood.
Yeah, roughly speaking, that's right.
Gosh. With stunted growth caused by poor nutrition, and half the children dead by their late teens, these bones can tell a story that Doomsday Book doesn't reveal. Just how often children lost the fight for survival. As an historian, I usually work on documents, artifacts, buildings, things left behind by adult males. And it's frustratingly rare to hear the voices of children in evidence that they themselves left behind. So it's been very moving to come here and see the physical remains of the children of Warren Percy. Despite the high infant mortality rate, this was a very young society. Roughly half the population was under 18. So there weren't enough adults to work the land and to feed and clothe everybody. Children had to be enlisted into the great challenge to survive. They helped with everything, from looking after the animals to separating the wheat from the chaff. So it's not quite child's play, but it is something that a child could do, right?
Yes.
Chris Russell has been using traditional medieval farming methods for over 20 years.
You started at 7 in the morning and you went on.
Yeah.
The children would have gone through this. It's a really boring job. And just made sure everything was taken out.
Despite being undernourished and often sick, children were doing what we would now consider to be adult work. And relatively young boys were expected to do hard manual labour.
Come on.
So, how old would you need to be before you would be allowed to do this sort of work, do you think?
You'd have been 9, 10 years old as an ox boy.
Yeah.
Because the ox man, as it were, the chap, he may have been on the plough behind.
Right, yeah.
So the boy would have been doing all the running and the stumbling over the plough.
Yeah.
You'd be quite energetic to keep them all in straight line as well.
In the constant struggle to make ends meet, children worked hard and died young. Does this suggest that medieval life was so tough that parents didn't care about their children, as we do today? The answer lies at the National Archives, at Kew in West London. These are some of England's earliest coroner's rolls. They were first put together in the 1270s, so they're nearly 750 years old. And you can really tell that working on them, the ink is beginning to fade. And to be honest, the script's pretty tough to read too. And reading it isn't exactly a joy either, because it tells a lot of tragic stories. You always know that every time you see a child's name in them, you know that they're going to come to a sad end. Here, it's a little girl, and her name was Amice, and she was the daughter of Sybil, and she was just helping her mum at home, and her mum had a lead vat full of boiling water, and poor little Amice fell into it, and her grief-stricken mother rushed across the room and tried to pull her out of the vat, but it was already too late. Amice had been killed and was scalded to death. Here, a certain 5-year-old boy called Richard was helping his father by going to the well to draw water, but he fell in and clearly couldn't get out, couldn't swim, and drowned, it says, by misadventure, and his sister was the first to find him. And here we read of Robert, son of Walter. Robert was killed by lightning, and his father ran distraught across the field to try to save him, but it was too late. He was dead. What these records prove is just how much parents were affected by their children's deaths. They loved them. Their compassion shows that this was a caring society. Today we see childhood as a distinct and precious phase of life. We try hard to give children a chance to be experimental and free from the stresses of adulthood. But was medieval childhood all work and no play? Is it not tempting to assume that childhood didn't exist at all? Well, that's precisely what some historians have argued. The pioneering book on the history of childhood, written in the 1960s, argued that there was no such thing as childhood in the Middle Ages. Children were just mini-adults. And lots of people believed it. After all, sounds plausible enough. Well, actually, no. That myth has been completely debunked. Historians have since discovered evidence that childhood as a distinct stage of life really did exist. For instance, we catch the occasional glimpse of children at play in medieval manuscripts. And Dr. Carenza Lewis is developing a theory that evidence of children's play could also be uncovered by archaeologists. She's been studying Bruegel's painting, Children's Games. Wow, this is amazing. What's going on here?
Well, I just love this. It is children playing. It's 500 years old, but it's really showing children doing all the sorts of things we think of children. It's such a happy picture. I mean, look, you've got girls there turning around, swirling their skirts out. You've got children playing King of the Castle on a mound there. We've got knucklebones down here, where you sort of throw something out in the air and pick stuff up before it hits the ground. There's a little play. Is that a marriage? Someone going into a nunnery, a coronation? I'm not sure. Little procession there. They've all put little hoods on there. There's a little girl playing with, well, I'm not sure if that's a mud pie or a dog poo, but anyway, sort of thing that children do.
This painting is a riotous fantasy of children's games. Yet Carenza Lewis believes we could find real archaeological evidence for them.
I mean, if you imagine all the children in this scene were suddenly called off to bed and they all rushed off and dropped everything they were playing with. What archaeological site would that leave us? So we look at this pile of bricks here. The possibility that children had arranged them like that would be ignored. This pile of standing stones here, there's one game which actually describes stones put up on end in a circle. Sounds like Stonehenge. Your average archaeologist wouldn't think about children. Once we've got an idea of the sort of things that children might have been doing, then we can look at our archaeological sites and look for evidence of those features. You know, I mean, this, look, someone's using an upturned pot here as a base. You can see he's running towards it. He's just touching it to prove he's touched it. And that pot is a classic medieval type. But people very rarely suggest they're being used for play.
And Carenza Lewis's theory is being supported by finds of children's toys.
They're copies of ordinary household objects, and they're little play items, like you'd have sort of doll's house furniture, the collections of objects for children to play with. So we have got a culture of childhood in the medieval period. Children are playing, they are playing in specific ways to children. It wasn't all blood, sweat and tears.